From 2019 to 2023, I worked on a multimedia documentary called Journey to EPCOT Center, A Symphonic History. This was my most ambitious video to date, for many reasons, but one being that I did not provide narration. This allowed the video to take on a more experimental tone with its subject matter, and ideally put the viewer in the perspective of the Imagineers tasked with fulfilling Walt Disney's Epcot promise. This format did not allow me to provide my own commentary and theories on certain aspects of the project's development. And over those 4 years of research, I found a lot of early Epcot peculiarities that I was not able to present in the film, or if I did, I wasn't able to literally say how odd they are. The early development of EPCOT Center is rife with misconceptions, confusion, and little mysteries, but I think there are only a few people in the world that have done the amount of research that I have on this subject, which makes me one of the most qualified people to haphazardly speculate on how EPCOT Center evolved into the weird park that opened on October 1st, 1982. So here I have a timeline of photos. These are from Epcot Center's early development, starting in the early 1970s and ending, of course, in October of 1982. These include concept art, promotional images, behind-the-scenes images that hopefully will give us a pretty good timeline of how the park developed from a layout perspective, and a few of the attractions concept art might be in here as well. But really, when I was researching for Journey to Epcot Center, a large part of the film was me trying to put together these versions of Epcot. And this was very difficult because no exact version occurred at once. So they were working on multiple layouts, multiple concepts, multiple attraction ideas. There was never a full version of Epcot that they were ready to build, because the one that they eventually did get ready to build, they built. And even then, they were starting construction with countries that weren't added and Future World pavilions where they weren't sure they were going. They were already clearing ground, not with a final plan in mind. But these images should give us some indication of where things were. So this is a photo from 1974 or 1975, and these show early concepts for World Showcase, and there's also some early concepts for Future World in this photo. But this concept for World Showcase looks to be a European country. I don't know. I can't get close enough. It's not high enough quality. There's no title on it that I can tell to really point out what country this is, or maybe it's just an idea for a general country that they mapped out. In the background, you can see some concept art, which almost looks as though it's a hotel, like another one of the Magic Kingdom resort hotels. So it's really difficult to tell what's happening here. One thing that I should say off the bat is all the photos we're going to look at were taken in a time where if someone was on site with a camera, people knew. It's not modern day, obviously, but the thing we have to remind ourselves is that whenever these photos are being taken, they're all posed. Even if they look candid, they very much know there's a photographer here, because it's not easy to snap a photo and just have a photo. These are professional photographers. Everyone that came in to work today probably knew they were going to be photographed, and that it was on their calendar that there was a photographer coming in. So they knew they were going to wear something that would look good on camera, that they wanted to wear to be photographed in. Card Walker has those aviators because he's super cool. He's the cool CEO. Don Tatum is also there. Yeah, Marty Sklar's always got great fashion. And so they knew they were going to be photographed, but they also, in some of these images, have set up, and I think this image is a great example, they've set up the room to be photographed. I mean, they probably, if you could zoom out and look at the margins of this photograph, if you could just widen the lens, you would see that there's probably not stuff on the edges of the room, because they've taken every concept art or piece of art that was in that room and pushed it into frame. And I think the way you could tell is Marty Sklar is obviously saying, "Oh, look at this," and presenting. The secretary is taking notes very intently, and then this person on the ladder is like, is he sticking something on there? Is he putting it up? He has his thumb out on the little square? I have no idea what that is, but everyone knows there's a photo being taken, and I think this is a very post photo. I also believe there was a video camera during this, and there is a video of this session, but it's from the same angle of like the same motion. So this is very staged, but they're pointing at a World Showcase pavilion, I believe. I'm not 100% sure. World Showcase is inside at this point. The entire thing is going to be inside, and each pavilion would it's like a giant strip mall in a circle, two like crescent moons of strip malls. And depending on how much each country paid, they would get a certain size of strip mall to work with. Not a lot was done with this concept at the time. There's some more photos in this with this concept in it. And then the other thing we can see is Future World toward the top right. I'm 99% sure these are early Future World theme center concept art pieces up here. And yeah. So I don't know what World Showcase Pavilion this is, but this is early on in development. The two ideas are still separated, with the Future World Theme Center and Walt Disney World Showcase. The World Showcase is going to be near the Ticketing and Transportation Center. There's very beautiful concept art done of this, where it's extremely close to the Magic Kingdom, as I think I talked about in the last Defunctland After Dark. So this photo is one of the earliest photos of Epcot Center's development. And another tell of this is that John DeCure Jr., who's the person all the way to the right of the frame, is in this shot. He eventually leaves the project. I think he moves to Spaceship Earth, or he leaves entirely pretty early on in development. But he's here right now, so we know it's early. And this is showing the Walt Disney World Showcase. This is in the Contemporary, I believe. And this is they're being interviewed. This is the press conference. They held two press conferences, I believe. One was for dignitaries to get them to sign on, and the other was for the press. This is still 1975. We're not even towards Epcot Center yet. The concepts are still separate. And we tried to recreate this in the Epcot video, and you can see that scene. It's the very orange scene with all the photographers. And so just tried to recreate a vignette of this in the video, and we tried to, I actually got, I don't know if anybody caught this, but we got their exact tie. I got that exact tie. I have it in my office right now, and tried to get as close as we could to what Card Walker was wearing. But Card Walker's so cool. He's the cool CEO. He's always dressed sharp, and so it's hard to find his outfits. But Don Tatum, very strict business. He shops at Macy's kind of guy. But I'm going to be honest, the progression of World Showcase is not that fascinating to me, because it's basically this country wants to do it, this country wants to do it. And then once a country signs on or signs off, you basically just add them to the map, and you know what each country should look like generally. I think some of the attractions in World Showcase are interesting, like when they were talking about making it more of a rides back there. But eventually, we're going to consider South Korea. And then it's like, well, here's a photo of South Korea from, a tourism blog, and here's a miniature version of it that we're going to make on a model. It's very simplistic. There's not that much intrigue, versus, to me, something like the concept of space. How do you represent that? That gets more strange ideas. But the Walt Disney World Showcase is what they were pitching. They were going all in on it, and they had a lot of photos from this point. So these photos of Marty Sklar and John Hench in front of the Future World model are possibly of a model that existed in July of 1975, but it's almost certainly not a photo that was taken in July of 1975. This is probably 1979, which is far along in the project's development. But they did these photo shoots where they would go, and they had all these models. It's not like they're taking sledgehammers to old ideas. In fact, Imagineering prides themselves on never throwing away an idea. You'll hear that a lot. So these models that they have still exist, and so when a photographer comes, as I mentioned, they're taking them around from model to model and just showing them all the models, despite that this no longer is an idea. And the way we know this is this photo here. You could say, oh, maybe that is 1975. It says Future World. That's clearly an old Future World concept. This is clearly an outdated model. They're no longer isolating it, so we know that this is probably 1975. The way I know it's not 1975 is because of this photo. And this photo has in the background the model from 1979, where it's clearly Epcot Center. We're going to see this photo later, but there's Spaceship Earth in the correct position. Communicore's right there. Even the World of Motion transportation is the wrong version of the transportation pavilion, but it's there. It's in the right spot. And World Showcase has its lagoon, and they clearly know where they're going to build it. It's in the background of this photo, so this had to have been taken later, despite this model that they're also standing in front of being an older version than the one that's in the photo. So this model to the bottom left is different than the one that's in the top right, and we can tell that through a few different ways, but I'll show those a little bit later. Back to this first model, let's pretend this photo was taken in 1975, or pretend this model is from 1975. So in this Future World model, which again is our favorites in terms of why is it like this. We see what I believe is the icon of Epcot Center, and I basically gotten a little bit of confirmation from various sources that originally, rather than a giant geodesic sphere to pay homage to Buckminster Fuller and the idea of Spaceship Earth and all that, the idea for the original castle or the icon of Epcot Center was these large pillars. And so we're going to see these in a lot of models, are these large pillars. And so we have two here. We have the one in the center of this model that we can clearly see where it's like 3 pillars pointed up. This eventually gets put on the fountain in front of Epcot Center that was then removed, I think, for a time, and then it came back very recently. But when the park opened, it had this fountain with basically this type of shape, and the same type of shape right here on this model down here, which looks like a isolated version of this. And who knows whether this is true or not. This is just me speculating based off of these models. But for me, it's you have this model of maybe the park or one of the main areas of Future World in this pillar in the center being the main icon of the park. In a similar way to Magic Kingdom, this would not be an attraction that you would interact with. Disneyland does have a walkthrough through the castle, so you can't really say that. And I guess Magic Kingdom has a restaurant. But in general, you're not meant to scale either Magic Kingdom castle or probably these pillars in Epcot Center the way you scale via ride vehicle Spaceship Earth. But yeah, so this looks to be the same concept, and they are making shapes. They think the future is shapes, and the future is shapes. But they're very interested in certain shapes. Certain shapes keep appearing, and we will continue to see these shapes as we move forward. So this model is the most developed Future World Theme Center model. Again, the parks are separated at this point. They've not converged them into Epcot Center. There's Future World Theme Center, and there's Walt Disney World Showcase. As far as Future World goes, this is the most developed model that exists of the Future World only concept. And there are a few different layouts of this. There's a few different items with this on it. And so if we go back to our first photo, we can see the same concept art on the wall that is on the wall behind Marty Sklar, John Hench, John DeCure Jr. here. And unfortunately, I cannot make out what these words say. I've tried very much. You can see a little bit, like in this one right here, you can see it says World City, which matches up with the top-down concept art where it's World City is in the center here. But other than that, I really wish I could see more of what it says. But what we do know is there's 3 main kind of sections here. There's communication and the arts, there's community, there's science and technology, and then I think down at the bottom is Communicore, which is where you would enter, and then you would go through to World City. There's some concept art that might be this. It's all very abstract at this point, and they really don't know what they're doing. From what I can tell from interviews, from everything, they are just trying to understand what a non-castle park could be, and they are going to eventually let the sponsors shape these areas. So imagine I'm going to present this to a potential sponsor for Future World, and I say to AT&T or the Bell System, I say, we have this entire wing for community, and we can pitch you whatever could be in here. You can pay for this entire wing. You could pay for this little circle right here. Who knows? But that's essentially the purpose of this. This is the idea behind this. They're not going to develop further until they get someone signed on, because they're going to have to backtrack when the sponsor doesn't want that, or they're going to have to say no to that sponsor. And at this point, they're not open to saying no to sponsors. That is all history that you're not going to hear a lot. You're going to hear a lot of more flowery stories, a lot of funnier stories. But the truth is just like the practicality of, we don't have anybody sign on this project, but we need to create a base template to plug them in. And I think that's what this is. A little bit of speculation on my part, but also backed up by a lot of my research. Also, in the center here, it's unclear whether this is supposed to be interior or you're supposed to be inside, or whether this is outdoors. It looks to be that this whole thing could be indoors, but most likely it's going to be outside. And I believe the World City model might be sitting under those pillars that we were seeing before. Those pillars being kind of the icons seem to still be in the center here. At least the shape of the pillars keeps appearing right in the dead center of the park. One thing that does kind of stay from this idea is the idea that Epcot's, or at least Future World or whatever, is going to be a linear experience. And most theme parks are not linear experiences, but Epcot was a little bit. I think Disneyland and Magic Kingdom, I guess, have some sort of linear introduction in that you enter and you see the train station, you walk under the train station, and then you walk down Main Street and you come up against the castle where it's like, okay, I'm in this, nostalgic time, and now I see the fantasy land in front of me. It's very vague, interpretable. I know people say it's like you enter the movie or you walk into the movie and now you're on the set or whatever the explanation is. But in general, Disneyland, once you get to the hub, is a park that you can decide where to go. And that's true for this version of Epcot. It's very much true for the end version of Epcot. But there was much more of an introduction, a longer introduction to this park, partly because you need to explain what this place is to people that have never been there. And so here, if we look down at this model, transport would be the monorail, it would be the parking lot, whatever that is. That's how people get there, right? So then they get off of the transport, they walk through the information store, which I have to imagine is a gift shop, and that's just a fantastic gift shop name. I'm appalled. To my knowledge, they never had something called the information store. That should be the name of a gift shop if it's not already. So they pass through the information store, and then you can go into one of two overview theaters. And this is depicted in laser in Journey to Epcot Center. You can see the theater that you enter, and then you exit. But these are supposed to be circle vision shows that you sit in that explains everything that you can see at Epcot Center. This is an idea that stuck and actually ended up in Epcot Center. It was actually built. So after Spaceship Earth, which is an introduction to Epcot Center for all intents and purposes, it is like the introduction show. They referred to it as that. Some people in the company still call it that. You would walk in through Epcot Center, you would ride Spaceship Earth. It would introduce you to this idea of mankind, and we're all part of the glorious Spaceship Earth, and communication is key to all this. You'd get off and enter Earth Station, and this had the World Key terminals where you can make reservations and talk to people and talk to customer support via like a rudimentary fake version of Skype that was via wire. So you could do that, but also it had this big show that played, and there were seats there for a time that you could sit and watch that basically explained every attraction through very small animations, but explaining the basic concept, playing the theme, showing you what you could do. And then on the World Key Station, it had more information that you could actually tap on Universe of Energy, for instance, and it would bring up exactly what you would see. Part of this original pitch is there would be overview theaters where you'd watch a show, and then you would enter Information Plaza, and then there'd be the Computer Center and World City model, and that's more of the hub, and then you'd go off and do whatever they were planning or whatever the sponsors would eventually sign on for these pavilions or wings or whatever you want to call it. So that is an idea that stuck from the original Epcot Future World Theme Center, which you always got to talk about when something sticks, because you got to know where things come from. Somewhere in 1975, 1976, they push Future World Theme Center, the model on that table, and they get the Model World Showcase and push them together, and they make Epcot Center, supposedly, but I'll get into that. First, I want to talk about the name Epcot Center. There's so much discussion on why it is called Epcot Center. I've heard a few theories that I want to run by real quick. One is that Epcot Center is the dead center of the Walt Disney World Resort, which is not true to my knowledge, but it is in the center of the resort, so I understand why people would think that's pretty close to the center. I also heard a theory that the reason was that they were actually going to build Epcot from Epcot Center. They were going to, as like radially, like build neighborhoods on the outside of it, so Epcot Center would be the center of Epcot, the city, the one that Walt wanted to build, and they're just going to keep expanding, and this park, or this industrial park / World's Fair, would be the center. I cannot find anything that says that is true, but it's an interesting idea. I have heard it in like a couple different places. And then the other one that I think is interesting is that Epcot Center is the center of all of Epcot's activities. And I think actually the reason I thought this was because for a while they were referring to Epcot as a multimedia, multi-faceted informational, educational apparatus, and Epcot Center, the park, would be the place you go to. And then there would be, curriculums for schools, there would be industrial parks at Walt Disney World, there'd be satellite projects, but they'd all be able to, you'd be able to hear about them all and experience a little bit of taste of them all at Epcot Center, the center of all of Epcot's activities, the Epcot Institute's activities. However, I have landed on my own theory, and this is based off of the fact that this is called the Future World Theme Center. I am 90% sure And this, because this is the first time we hear center. This first time center comes into play is with the Future World theme center. I'm confident, but I'm not 100%, but I feel very confident in saying the reason EPCOT Center is eventually called EPCOT Center with center in the title is because of the EPCOT Future World Theme Center. It's a leftover from that. And the reason EPCOT Future World Theme Center is called the EPCOT Future World Theme Center is because of Science Center. In the same way that theme park is derived from amusement park. So there are amusement parks, but Walt doesn't want to make an amusement park. He wants to make a theme park, or he wants to make Disneyland Park. You know, it's a different type. It's a themed park, a park which has the functions of an amusement park and you know, a trolley park and all these things, but it is themed. And in this way, they took theme park and said, well, it's not going to be an amusement park. There's not going to be thrill rides, or there might not even be dark rides. It's going to be different than a normal science center or informational center or whatever this may be, because it's going to be themed. So we have a theme park in Magic Kingdom, and we have a theme center in Epcot. That's my theory. I'm sticking to that. But I truly believe that's why it's called Epcot Center. It's just derived from that, which was derived from what I just mentioned.
Just so there's no confusion, EPCOT Center is located in the center of Epcot. And EPCOT Center is made up of two parts, which is Future World and the World Showcase. It's 2.5 miles from the Magic Kingdom, which is also part of Epcot, which is what the entire 27,000-acre area known as the Experimental Prototype Community of Tomorrow, or EPCOT, or Walt Disney World, is called. Just so there's no confusion.
So I believe this is Epcot in early 1977. This is a very early concept model for Epcot Center. If you notice the Communicore concept art in the background here, pre-Spaceship Earth, in which the pillars are the focal point of the park. You can also see the pillars again down here in the center of all of these models. Sometimes there's 6 pillars, sometimes there's 4 pillars, but the pillars are the center of the park, and Spaceship Earth is nowhere to be seen. I also love this early concept for Future World, which was huge on these orbs. It's very orb heavy. It was going to be very outside, it seems, like an exterior park more than what Epcot Center became, which Epcot Center was kind of a future thinking, forward thinking theme park in that most of it was inside, and it's also in Florida, so it was raining all the time and hot all the time, and so most of Epcot Center, the original Epcot Center, was indoors, with very little taking place outdoors. And I think the best example of this is like the Land, which is all the attractions indoors in these giant pavilions, air-conditioned pavilions, free from the rain. They obviously had Magic Kingdom and all the problems Magic Kingdom was experiencing, as opposed to Disneyland in their mind. However, this park seems to be much more outside, and one of the structural shelter elements is that, yeah, we have technology like we're going to have in Communicore, but it's through orbs. So the rain will just, you know, this computer, this terminal, which a true terminal, and that is connected to a larger computer underground or somewhere else, this very expensive terminal in 1977, 1982 eventually, you know, it'll be fine in the rain because of this orb. And there's a lot of orbs. If you look at Epcot Center concept art enough, you will see orbs, and the orbs slowly disappear. How sad. A lot of people talked about how World Showcase was supposed to be Epcot Center's main street, because you would enter through it and exit through it, and that's where you want all of your gift shops, which is why Disneyland is kind of that genius for many reasons. But when people want to point out the evil genius of Disneyland, I don't know if it's evil, but it's very smart business-wise to put all of your shops, your most prominent shops, in the entrance and the exit, and only have there be one entrance and one exit, because you can enter and exit through the gift shop. That should have been what World Showcase was. However, I think the idea was the Future World, they knew it was going to be boring. And I heard the story, I believe it was Card Walker. They were trying to get World Showcase to be the entrance, and Card Walker was like, no, Future World's a hard enough sell for guests already. We need to have people enter through Future World, or else they're not going to visit those pavilions. And maybe they'd already promised GM and Exxon that they would be toward the front of the park. But I think in general, it was just like, we know that people are going to struggle to be interested in the tech and educational stuff. we need people go to World Showcase rather than go to Future World. Because if you think about the expectations of audiences at this time, World's Fairs were well known, but they were a little bit past their prime. The 1964 World's Fair was very much one of the last big World's Fairs. It was also, of course, not one of the official World's Fairs, but this concept was slowly waning. But people knew that a World's Fair included an International Village, and the International Village was most often the most fun part of the World's Fair for people, because you could try different foods, you could see different cultures, you can see shows, you get to go to attractions that feel as though you're traveling around the world. Especially relevant in a world where air travel was not nearly as prominent as it is today. So there is this intrinsic value, intrigue, interest, and it lasts even up till today, that, oh, I get to visit all these countries, I get a little flavor of each country, whether that be through actual food, through drink, through language, through architecture, whatever it is. You get to experience that in quick succession, very conveniently. It's obviously, even on the onset of this, an attraction. I mean, Walt wanted one for Disneyland. Walt wanted one in the center of Epcot, the city. The idea of an international street, an international showcase, it has obvious built-in value to an audience. They get it, they understand it, they want it, and so it needs to be put apart from the entrance, because otherwise people aren't going to go to Future World, because Future World is such a hard sell in comparison to this to the World Showcase concept. Another thing that I want to talk about a World Showcase, because I don't know if I'm going to go back to this concept, is that with World Showcase, the money was not coming from World Showcase the same way the money was coming from Future World. Exxon was putting up so much more money than, say, France and their combined way of getting sponsors for each of those pavilions, to the point where once they realized that the countries weren't going to sign on, because none of the original Epcot World Showcase pavilions were sponsored by the country. It was all a conglomeration of different corporations that were related to or located within that country. So France had like 5 different sponsors that signed on to fund that pavilion. That is not paying the bills in the same way that Exxon is when they come in with $20 to $40 million. GM, not only are people not sold on it that the sponsors are going to be one at the front, but they're the ones that are actually paying for the most attractions, the most real estate here. That's where that money is coming from, so we need to put them at the front of the park. World Showcase, because they realized that we're not going to get sponsorships from these countries, we're going to have to go to companies. They decided, well, if we're going to do this, we're going to pick the countries that people are most interested in. And originally, they had chosen the countries that were most interested in sponsoring. So it was a total 180 originally, because you would get weird countries on some of these maps. You're like Taiwan and South Korea, I think, was on for a bit. These countries that you're like, why? And the reasoning is, these countries saw a huge benefit in being attached to a Disney project. So for a small country in, say, Europe, for the same reason that a guest visiting Epcot Center wouldn't want to visit, say, a small country in Europe versus France, is the same reason that small country in Europe wanted to sponsor Epcot Center, because they said, if we have a pavilion here, our tourism department could sponsor this, and all of these Americans or all of these people from around the world are going to visit, see our culture, see what we have to offer, and then maybe they'll book a trip to our country and bring that money through tourism dollars to our country. And the countries that were least interested in this were the ones that already had tourism and did not need this. So France and Italy and these large countries that were already well known as large tourist destinations, and so are to this day. So it's funny, because in the mind of the Epcot guest, they're thinking, oh, I want to visit France, I want to visit Italy, I want to visit Mexico, these countries. And the countries that actually are the ones that want to put up the money the most are the ones that are not in the minds of the guests. So it's this weird disparity that is all interconnected. But then it flips. None of the countries are actually going to sponsor. They're not going to put up the money because they don't have the money, or their governments won't do it. We're going to go to these, hodgepodge of 6 companies for France, 8 companies for Italy, however many it was. We're going to do that with the countries people want to visit. We're going to do that with France and Italy and Mexico. We're going to go after those types of companies. We're going to meet the expectation of our audience rather than do what we were going to do before, which was just take whatever money comes in, which would go in direct defiance of the expectations of the audience. The World Showcase paradox. But obviously, just from like an intuitive point of view, World Showcase should be the entrance, right? It should be the entrance to the park, but it's not. So when we look at this model, which if you watch Journey to Epcot Center is the one that comes together I don't believe a story that is often told about EPCOT, and this is wrong of me, maybe, but I don't believe the story where they just push the models together. The story where they push the models together is basically Marty Sklar and John Hench are working on EPCOT. They have a pitch coming up with all of the VPs or the board or something like that. And Cardwalker's like, we got to figure something out. And essentially they had the model for Future World. They had the model for World Showcase. And before the meeting, they pushed them together. And one of his books, I believe it's Dream It Do It, or maybe it's his other book, detail how overnight the model shop had to stitch it together to make it look cohesive, to make it work. And I'm not sure I believe this. I believe that happened, but I don't think it was when they pushed Future World and World Showcase together. The timeline doesn't match up with what is described. Well, it's either he's wrong on when this happened. It's a model we've never seen, but this couldn't happen. And I kind of have some reasons as to why I believe this didn't happen. But I think if we were to look at anything, we would have to look at this model of Future World that we were looking at earlier and see maybe this could be this model. If there was a version of this, I mean, we have all of this photos of these different models and none of them look exactly like the model that was pushed together with the table. I'm sure the one they did for the meeting was shoddy, and I'm sure it was never photographed like this. I think it must have been a situation where the story is far more complicated. For instance, this photo, perhaps they took two sections, this section and this section, removed this middle section, pushed these together, then the model shop just started making shapes, pushed those together, and then they made a World Showcase and pushed that together. But World Showcase doesn't look like this either. It's really difficult to tell exactly what they meant by this. The story that they push these models together is difficult to check. It's really not something worth making a fuss over. It's a fun story. I don't think it's a lie. I think this happened. I think this time when they pushed two models together before a meeting happened. I just think it's a separate instance from when they made the decision that EPCOT Center should combine Future World and World Showcase. I think it's a combination of two real things that happened. That they decided that they should combine World Showcase and Future World, and that they pushed two models together. I think there's a good chance these are two different true things that have been combined by Marty Sklar and others to tell a more simplistic version of the story. That is more interesting because the real version of it is less interesting, but I'm about to get into that. But if we just look at this model and assume this was one of the first ones after the tables were pushed together, obviously this one probably was cleaned up and made to look better, we see that there is a people mover that connects World Showcase with Future World. We see the people coming through the monorail. We see that there's this big lake in the middle, and we don't see a parking lot. And I think that's interesting because we're not going to see a parking lot for a minute, which at this stage of development, maybe there wasn't going to be a parking lot. Although if you've seen the previous Defunctland After Dark, I think there was never going to be a parking lot. I think there was a version of EPCOT Center that didn't have a parking lot. And then we have, again, this weird shaped Future World. Really no information about this one as to where things are going to be. There is a version coming up that looks a little bit like this, but rather than the shapes kind of being in this V formation, the two wings of Future World just become in one straight line, left and right, rather than this kind of V is the only way I could describe it. Again, we're working with shapes here. We're going to plug in whatever sponsors we get, whatever attractions we come up with. But this is EPCOT. It's shapes. World Showcase is angular. Future World is circular. That's the concept. I think the story that's told where the two tables are pushed together is not 100% true. It's very simplified, obviously, as most stories and anecdotes of that nature are. I think there's two versions. The one that I mentioned before, which is that these are two separate events, and another is that this model that they made overnight for this meeting was not pushing two tables together, and that is an oversimplification of the process, and that really what it was them uprooting things from multiple models, multiple World Showcase models, multiple Future World models, or just small elements from Future World models and World Showcase models, and creating a new model with the model shop. And I don't think it was an actual pushing together of two different tables. I think it was a grab that circle, grab that element, put that there, put that there, put that there, and that feels more realistic. And maybe that is true to everyone else, and to me, it's just my technical brain. It's like, you technically didn't push two tables together like you're describing. But the artistic license, as I mentioned before, is that in Journey to Epcot Center, they lock perfectly, and it's beautiful. It goes chick, chick. And I used a seatbelt sound effect for when they come together. It's very subtle. If you listen to it again, it goes together. Chick, chick. Just as a way of saying, like, isn't this perfect? These next photos are working with this same model, a better view of the model, a little bit different model, more large and more three-dimensional. But this is where we really get into talking about pillars. The best part of this video is we're talking about pillars. This is early 1977. Ray Bradbury's here. We have a three-dimensional version of the original model on the table. It's thick. These are supposed to be buildings, clearly, which is interesting. I don't know if you would walk inside to all three of these, or if you're outside and you walk into them, and these are tiny little pavilions on these big wings, which is somewhat like Epcot becomes, because you have Epcot Future World East and Future World West. But at this time, it's very clear that they're more wings rather than areas, if that makes sense. I just don't understand this middle part. This, like, is this just a structure that you can walk under? Is this somewhere you can go inside of? Or is it just supposed to be a walkway? Does gray represent where you can walk? And if so, you're walking so far, and then you're so isolated. It looks like this model does show that there's a walkway to World Showcase, but again, there's so little here. One thing that I want to talk about, obviously is the only thing that I have to talk about, is that they knew there was going to be a lagoon pretty early on, because I think of the land assessment. This is my belief, mixed with some things that people have mentioned in interviews and things that I've heard. I think they knew pretty much, whether because the land was cleared or because the land was not perfect for building. And actually, sorry, I just remembered, Joe Rohde said this the other day on Twitter. That's the other reason I thought of this. Joe Rohde responded to someone who was like, the World Showcase, it needs the lagoon. And this poor person who was just tweeting about Disney. I don't know if they were being rude, or maybe it was a snarky tweet, but Joe Rohde responds with, we can't build anything where the lagoon is because the ground's unstable. And it's like, oh, okay. So I guess they knew that. They knew there had to be a lagoon. There had to be nothing, at least there. And the lagoon is pretty consistent for that reason. Epcot Center is looking almost right. You can kind of get the vibe. Future World, again, the entrance is still in the wrong place. The pillars are still the icon of the park, and the pillars are being analyzed by Card Walker, not in one of his best fits, because John Hench is beating him. I think he has an ascot. I don't know, is that what it's called? Is that an ascot? And this beautiful Mickey polo with a button pocket for my wallet or whatever I need to store there. And then Ray Bradbury. And there's two versions of the pillars, and of course this is a stage photo. There's also video of this exact angle, so they got the photographer and they got the videographer. There is a video of them looking at this model and zooming out, so they're pretending to do work and say, look at this model, look at the model, oh yeah, I see the model. But if you look at it, it looks like this is two versions of the same concept of the center of this park is going to be a pillar. And I think the concept, and this is pure speculation, the concept is futuristic skyscrapers in the middle of this utopian futuristic place. And that's much more obvious when you see kind of this one that looks kind of Space Needle-esque. Yes, it harkens back to World's Fairs, but it's also this idea of the city of the future, of this curvature and reaching to the sky and all that stuff. I'm sure there was a brief about why they were going to use pillars as the icon of the park. But I think it's interesting that they're all here, looking at what is going to be the center of the park, the icon, and Spaceship Earth isn't here yet. And one of the last versions of this that I can find is the first mention of parking. And this is one of the more interesting little things. I forget where I found this. Good note keeping. Good job, me. But this is the V formation, so we know this is the same version as this. We believe there's pillars here. We hope there's pillars here. But strangely, there's two parking lots now, which is, I think, is very strange. Because these parking lots look very small, very small, and on either side, so you could enter from World Showcase or Future World, which seems to not be the case in some of this. I mean, perhaps they always meant for this to be a parking lot, but it seems pretty clear that this is the main entrance. This is where it's positioned. Also, this is, as far as cardinal directions go, how Epcot will end up. So they know where World Showcase is, because World Showcase will be on the lagoon. They know where the lagoon is, and they know where they're going to build. They also know where the highway is, all this stuff. So they know that World Showcase is going to be to the south, and Future World is going to be toward the north, and that is what they built. If you look at aerials of Epcot Center today, that's how it is. It's all backwards. It's extremely confusing. It's like, I think, one of the only parks that's built backwards, because Magic Kingdom and Disneyland are both built north to south. When you're looking at the castle, you're looking pretty much true north down Main Street in both parks. However, here is not the case. It's completely flipped. When you're looking at Spaceship Earth as you enter Epcot from the main entrance, you're looking due south. Everything's is backwards, which is another just peculiarity. Lots of peculiarities, weird things. It seems not caused by any creative choice, but caused by the land itself and what they were forced to build, and they knew they wanted the lagoon to be closer to World Showcase, or a part of World Showcase, as we see in this. And so that pretty much dictates where World Showcase is going to be, and you only have so much room to build Future World. And then when you can have two entrances, and then they say no entrance by World Showcase, that's where everyone's going to park. That eventually they do build an entrance where there are the three Epcot resorts: the Boardwalk, the Yacht Club, and the Beach Club around Crescent Lake, yes, and you can enter Epcot through there, and it is where everyone wants to park because it's awesome. You can park at the Beach Club if you have a reservation to dine there, and then you can walk into Epcot by France, and it's just a beautiful way to enter, because every time I do that, the only reason you would ever need to go to the front of the park is to go on Spaceship Earth. So even if you do visit some of the Future World pavilions, you're never going all the way to the front of the park. But you know, if you're gonna spend even a couple hours at Epcot, you're gonna go around World Showcase. So you might as well park there. So they were right, is what I'm saying, is that they were correct. People want to park near World Showcase. I want to park by World Showcase. I have parked by World Showcase in real life today. It's awesome. It's superior. If there were two parking lots, I am picking World Showcase parking lot every time, and knowing Disney, it would definitely be an upcharge. This version just has two parking lots, which I find extremely interesting. So perhaps there were always supposed to be parking lots on either side. But the reason that there are versions of this where the parking lots are not there, or maybe wouldn't be there at all in the concept, is because they know they're going to build the monorail from the Ticket and Transportation Center to Epcot Center, even when they're developing it as Epcot Center. And so the thought is, if we need to expand parking, we will expand the Ticket and Transportation Center. We don't need a parking lot. And then that was probably abandoned very quickly. We need a parking lot outside because of many reasons, probably partly because of all the chaos of Magic Kingdom was already experiencing, of like getting people to and from, lack of alternative options. If the monorail goes down, everyone's cars are in a totally different place. But I wouldn't be surprised if it was considered, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was integrated into some of the models, because that was the original concept for the entire resort, as we discussed last episode.
Now that beautiful round object behind me, right there, is an engineering marvel called Spaceship Earth, and that is the symbol of Epcot Center.
Now, everyone put on your conspiracy hats. This is from a Martin Smith video, Martin's Vids, the king of theme park content, as far as I'm concerned. I have no idea where Martin got this. I think it's incredible, and also I have a conspiracy about it. So my conspiracy is that this is the table that was pushed together. This is when the decision was made that Spaceship Earth would be the center of the park, and that World Showcase would be the edge of the park, and they would get rid of these pillars. So this model does look like the fabled table that was combined. However, the inclusion of this large sphere indicates that this model was actually created after the decision for a single park was made, because the geodesic sphere, the non-geodesic simple sphere, anytime you see a sphere, it's pretty much after Epcot Center became Epcot Center. You can see the pushing appears to be the removal of the middle pillar as the icon of the park, creating Spaceship Earth as the park's icon. So This alternative theory, as we stack up our theories as to whether or not the story is true, that they literally pushed these tables together, is we seem to have photographic evidence that there were 2 tables that at some point were pushed together. And I think that is very momentous, as this is the time we realize that Spaceship Earth is going to be the centerpiece of EPCOT Center. So in a way, this is a momentous table pushing together, as we've removed the pillars, which is devastating. We hate it. We were big fans of the pillars and orbs. And now we're on to spheres, which not as exciting as pillars and orbs, but we don't know at this point how big the sphere is going to be, and how much it will look like a golf ball. And that will eventually soothe our broken hearts, ease our concerns. Anyways, I just find this fascinating, that it's either Marty Sklar's misremembering, Marty Sklar's combining stories, as, he is Walt's show writer. After all, he did help Walt, make some of his own narratives as his script writer. He's misremembering. I don't think he's lying, in any wrong way, or it's just so boring that the only way to tell the story to anyone that isn't crazy about this is to just say, yeah, we had these 2 ideas and we pushed the tables together, because this version of it's far less interesting, of like, oh yeah, we had these 2 ideas, we thought, well, we could combine them into one, we put the model together, we realized it could work, we made another model, and then at some point we pushed tables together because we realized Spaceship Earth should be the centerpiece of the park. I'm bored, and I'm fascinated with this as far as the story goes. The reason I don't believe that this is the table being pushed together, or the reason I'm skeptical of it, is because we have a far less developed concept where the 2 parks are together, Future World and World Showcase. In this concept, we have far less development. It's far more rudimentary, but it's very different from what they eventually build. So this right here is the last model before we separate everything into pavilions. I think this is further along than this model, and I think this model is further along than this model. But that's just me. I could be wrong. I don't know. Or these things could have been being developed at the same time, and none of this is linear, and there's just a bunch of models. And if I was there that day, I could look at this, and then I could turn and look at this, and I could say, well, which one's which? And they'd say, I don't know. I think the removal of the pillars, it means that this is post this model, which has the pillars. And so anyways, that's my evidence. A lot of theories, sorry. This model is also notable not just for being one of the last models to feature the pillars, not just for being possibly the origin of the story of the 2 models being put together, if not the 2 models that were pushed together. But I think this is interesting because this is the last time we have imagery of Future World Showcase in EPCOT Center that does not have clear labels on the pavilions. This photo has labels that I cannot read, and it's clear that they're starting to ideate on this. But after this, we have some models, some concepts, illustrations, diagrams that are far more along. After this, we get into EPCOT Center proper. We get into 1978, 1979. They're releasing this, they're promoting it, they're getting sponsors. They're really getting specific about what core concepts are going to be in Future World. They're trying to get specific about what countries are going to be in World Showcase. This is the last time we're going to get to see these pillars in EPCOT Center that never was. One of hope, of optimism, and pillars and orbs. Abstract Epcot, this one's for you.
If you see through the eyes of a dreamer, the future belongs to you.
Okay, well, that's the end of this video. I originally intended to go through the rest of EPCOT Center's development in this, and I even have some cool graphics that we'll get into apparently in part 2, because this is getting quite long, and I want to make sure that I am fresh and organized with all my information. So I am sorry that I rambled so much. I'm sorry that I don't have a proper conclusion with a great point. I guess I'll have to save that for the next part, but I feel like this is a good stopping point, because after this we are going to get into the development of the EPCOT Center that was actually built.